So
You look good.
good to be here. I look good. You look good. McShane's has been open for a week, and that's certainly helped. The weather's good. The spring cleaning and yard work that typically hits the Central Coast is happening, and having now four people back to work and an ad open for a fifth is a real positive thing. So
Good.
yeah.
Good. Construction is okay now in Monterey County, correct?
Construction is okay in Monterey County. Now there's a whole litany of protective measures. So everybody's on PPE and distancing and everything else. We've done a lot of tailgate training, a lot of noticing, and obviously the governor moving towards phase 2 and amendments to the county order that allow retail pickup and so forth have really helped. It's a balancing act, as I'm sure you're experiencing, right?
But you nailed it. What you just said is the key to going forward, in the sense that we got a balance between our public health and our economic health. It's not one or the other. You know what I'm saying? And it's finding that balance. And, look, as you're feeling, as we felt this weekend, if you're out and about this weekend, I mean, people are there. They want to get out, man. They want to go. And so I think it's making sure we find that balance going forward and realizing that it's not one or the other and that it will be gradual. This isn't the on-off switch. It's a dimmer, as they say. And I agree with that. And I just think it's going to be, we'll get there, but we also have to realize, and I think this is a lot of the issue too, of the uncertainty of what that normal will be.
Yeah. And I guess, that's where I look to you. I mean, you guys have been out of session for quite some time, which is its own beast. You've been following the order. What is your read on Washington? I mean, you're in touch with your staff. As I was sharing at the start of the call, I'm in touch with your staff. They're still working. You had one of your staff assigned to a Zoom call I hosted on Union Pacific and the right-of-way and homeless impacts on food safety. Clearly everybody's still working. What's your read on Washington? And, what's your take on the House, the Senate, the president? What do you think?
Yeah, well, look, I think, Steve, I mean, the way that we have addressed this, as we've seen, is that there is not one national unified strategy. And that's for a number of reasons, okay? Mm-hmm. But I think in replace of that, what you're seeing is sort of a disconnected strategy, which has ultimately come together. And what I mean is that I look at it's federally funded, state mandated, locally executed. And so in Congress, even though we're not back in Washington, D.C., although I've been going back for crucial votes on crucial pieces of legislation, those pieces of legislation have provided that funding. So in Congress, we've actually done our job in meeting that strategy of providing the federal funds necessary for the states and the local municipalities to then do their job to fight this pandemic with the resources necessary based on the funding Congress has provided. Now, and we provided a boatload of funding. We passed 4 huge bills right now, billions and billions, almost 3 trillion in 4 bills that we passed over the last month. And we're going to be doing another one now, and I'll get to this, another one coming up within the next week. But the 3 bills we passed, obviously the first one at the beginning of March had to do with testing. The second one had to do with healthcare. The third one was the CARES Act that provided $2.2 trillion in funding, the largest stimulus package in our nation's history. And it had such benefits in there, like the Paycheck Protection Plan, like the direct funding to states and cities and counties, like the direct disbursements to individuals, those paychecks, those checks to individuals. They also had, dealing with agriculture, dealing with hospitals, dealing with testing. So a number of areas that were shored up through funding at the federal level. Now, then we passed the extension because, as you heard, the PPP was running out. Therefore, that $350 billion went by very quick. We then voted to provide another $310 billion to the PPP, and we voted to improve it as well, to make sure that those smaller businesses, minority-owned, woman-owned businesses had the appropriate lenders there with the available funds. Because I'm sure you heard the stories like I heard over and over of people not having those long-time relationships with those big banks getting shut out of the PPP. And so we wanted to make sure that we shored up those smaller lending institutions, those more local lending institutions in that extension bill. And then going,
Yeah.
forward.
And to that,
Go ahead.
the city responded similarly at a local level, working with the county and the El Pajaro CDC to make funding available to, again, local, smaller businesses, say that may not, they may have missed the boat. But so I'm really glad you touched on that. Yeah. But go ahead.
No, that's great. No. You guys have been doing a great job there in Salinas. You guys really have been. And basically, like I said, playing your part in executing with the resources that you have. So thank you for that. Yeah.
So keep going with that, though. You were saying the extension.
Well, we did. We passed the extension, and then this week coming up, where the majority is going to be putting forward a bill, basically putting on the president's desk to. I think the priority that I'm seeing is making sure that there's direct funding to local counties, cities, municipalities with less than 500,000, and I use that number because on the CARES Act, there was $150 billion to counties and cities over 500,000. And to put it in perspective, St. Louis, Missouri didn't even get that direct funding because they don't have 500,000 in people. California got 15 billion out of that 150 billion. 5.5 billion went to those cities and counties with over 500,000, and there's basically about 9.5 sitting up in Sacramento right now, and we're trying to figure out where the hell that money is going to. Now, what we want to do, and what I believe we're going to do in this next bill, is make sure that there is direct funding to cities and counties with less than 500,000, and actually use CDBG formulas or population formulas to make sure that those smaller cities and counties get that money directly. So that really is a bipartisan issue that you're seeing Democrats and a lot of Republicans support. So I believe that's going to be the number one priority, because as you're seeing, and as I spoke with Mayor Gunter, it's the lack of TOT and the lack of taxes, and lack of funding that are coming in. That's going to hit our public services, our police, our fire, our sewer, or garbage, and they're going to take a hit. So we want to make sure that we shore that up with the funding coming in from the federal government.
Well, and even today at the governor's press conference, and I posted to social media my notes from that. There was, as he has shared on several occasions, this real strong message that there's got to be some federal assistance, and to the CARES Act and the lack of attention to cities and regions or counties under 500,000 in population. I know through AMBAG, which I chair, Mara Toomey, and even the enthusiasm of the mayor of King City, Mike Labar. I know you heard from him. This idea that maybe through the MPO we could apply for CARES Act funding. Did you ever get a reply on that or a response?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if we've got a reply yet. I don't think we have, but we actually tried. We wrote that letter, making sure that, see what happens. And we'll see what happens in this next bill. Obviously, leadership will be taking that into account because of the letter we wrote. But at the same time, how it's going to look is if we can at least get, and some of the numbers that leaderships that we're in negotiations on are to about 10,000. If there's city about 10,000, they're going to try to get direct funding per the formulas, the population formula that I talked about. So hopefully that won't be necessary to use AMBAG, but if it is, we'll continue to fight for that as well.
Fight that. You said you've gone back for crucial votes and stuff. What's it like? What are the airports like? I mean, I haven't been on a plane in quite some time. What's the U.S. Capitol like? I mean, tell us about your experience of getting in and out. I mean, you're traveling, and 99% of the people watching this probably aren't.
No, it's interesting. I mean, there are more airport employees than there are customers at the airport, which is very eerie. Something that I've never experienced before. And so you walk through and there's hardly anybody in the airport. Like I said, there's more employees than there are people who are flying the planes.
Hey, I'm on a call. Okay. Sorry.
It's all right.
That happens.
And, I love it. It's it's what this is
Don't
about.
worry.
Trust me. So that's all right. I mean, it's what we do. And as I look at it, that's the least I can do as a federal representative. I fortunately knew that traveling from California to Washington, D.C. was just part of the job. And that's the least that I can do, especially during this pandemic, is get on a plane, go back to Washington, D.C. and vote during these times. So that's just part of the job. Obviously there are issues with travel and safety and that, but you take precautions, you bring your hand sanitizer, you wear your mask, and you go from there. And so hopefully everything works out, knock on wood.
And you have one staff member in your Capitol office. It's on a rotation, right? Is that?
No, actually, it depends. Now my office is, all of them are working remotely, but we are answering the phones. No one's there physically, but we're answering the phones. And we are answering the phones 9 to 5, Monday through Saturday. And so we're working remotely. And right now, I mean, there was an issue with whether or not we're going to come back and be in session full time, I guess would be the appropriate phrase, whether or not we're in Washington full time. And the answer is, I don't know when that's going to happen. And if we do, what that's going to look like, because it's easy to take the myopic view of just saying, okay, members have to come back in session. Well, yeah, if it was just up me, that'd be no problem. Get on a plane, go back, I'm good. But Washington works a lot more with just the members, because you got us, you got staff, you got police, you got janitors, you got Capitol Police, and it just, it goes out, layers of it. There's layers upon layers of our work. And so it's figuring that out, which I think is going to be the big issue coming up as to when we go back full time. We might have to head back this week. It's Monday the 11th. We got word today that we'll either head back on Thursday for a Friday vote or Monday for a Tuesday vote on the next big emergency relief package. And I'm not sure. I like I said, my staff is doing a good job remotely, whereas I just have to go on and vote on something. I don't know if it will be necessary or not to have a staff member there. If I'm on I'm sure maybe one will come in. I don't know, but I'm not going to call everybody back in, because there are certain precautions that we have to take when we do have staff back in.
Yeah. I want to be mindful of your time. Anything you'd say to small business, or even just priorities that you'd have. I mean, I'm sure you're hearing the same things or more at the federal level than, we hear at local government and at the city level. Anything to small business?
And I appreciate that, Steve. And the good thing is that, what is going on in Washington, D.C. is what I'm hearing here in the district, in the sense that there are people throughout this country that have the same things to say, for better or for worse, about the PPP or the direct funding, protecting our farm workers, protecting our essential workers, making sure there's protections. I just signed off on a letter to leadership, basically making sure that if there is any more funding, that our farm workers are protected. And it's making sure that our agriculture is supported. It's making sure that the Paycheck Protection Plan not only has the funding there, but is administered effectively and efficiently. And that was the biggest issue, is that our goal with the PPP was to get money out the door as quick as possible. But it was such a huge amount that it did overwhelm the SBA. And just to kind of give you an idea, look, in a normal year, the Small Business Administration deals with 60,000 loans for $30 billion in 1 year. Okay, 60,000 loans, $30 billion worth in 1 year. The PPP was 1.6 million loans for $350 billion in 13 days. And so there was a high demand, but there were also a lot of hiccups as well because of that pressure on it. And so I can tell you that there were issues at first. We're working them out. And actually the calls this week and at the end of last week to my office were a lot more positive than the calls that I was receiving from small business owners a couple weeks back. So we're getting there. It's improving, but it's all because we're listening to you and hearing your voices, and your voices are being heard in Washington, D.C. through me and other representatives. So I believe that we're going forward with that.
You continue to welcome that. I mean, it sounds like your staff is Monday through Saturday. So
Definitely.
Write, email, call, you depend on that.
That's right. And I mean, like I always do, Stephen, that's the most important thing, is that people understand that if there's an issue with the federal government, being it now during this pandemic, with the PPP or any other issue at any other time as a federal issue, they know that they can call my office. I've always looked at this job as being that bridge from the Central Coast to Washington, D.C., fighting through the bureaucracy and back, and providing that answer to them. So yeah, you bet. It's, you can call the Salinas office, 831-424-2229. If you have any federal issue, be it now during the pandemic or thereafter, know that we're there for you. But just know that, look, I think, like I said, with that strategy of federally funded, state mandated, locally executed, I do believe we are able to come together and fight this pandemic and be able to get through this pandemic as best as possible. Now, as we talked about earlier, there is pressure to open up the economy, and we understand that. And boy, do we feel that. And boy, do we want it to get back to some sense of normalcy because of the economic disaster that's so very real due to this pandemic.
Yep.
But I would just say that when we start to open up, that it has to be based on data and doctors. It's not one or the other, and let's make that clear. There's a balancing act between our public health and our economic health that I do believe we are finding and will continue to find as we go forward. The word that I've been hearing often is patchwork, a patchwork of openings, a patchwork of testing capabilities, a patchwork of outbreaks. And it's true. That's kind of the nature of this disease throughout our country. It's hitting different areas in different ways. And therefore, I do believe that everybody has to balance the public health and the economic health within certain regions in order to make that decision based on science, data, and public opinion and the numbers going forward. And when you do that balance, I believe that that's where we're slowly going to be getting back into it. But we just can't, like I said, this isn't going to be a light switch, as we've talked about, as you heard. It will be a dimmer. We will eventually get there, but it has to be done, I believe, smartly and based on science rather than just the pressure and the feeling and the urge to get back to it, which we all want to do. We just have to be smart about doing it.
Yeah. Last question would just be, is there anything else in this session that you think Congress is going to be able to prioritize and get done besides just COVID-19 every day, all the time?
It's a really good question, Steve, and I really appreciate it. The answer is yes. Obviously, we can pat our heads and rub our belly at the same time. We always have been. And so I do believe that obviously now the focus is on this public emergency that we're dealing with when it comes to fighting back against COVID-19. And we're getting there. We're doing that. But more needs to be done, not only to get us through the pandemic, because if there's not a vaccine, other ways have got to be able to show us light as to who has this thing and who doesn't. With the asymptomatic nature of this disease, it makes it very difficult to tell people, we want you to come together, but we don't know who has this disease. So I think we can do that with more testing and more contact tracing, and I'm dropping a bill tomorrow that provides resources for contact tracing at the local level, which I believe is important to go forward if we don't have a vaccine. Now, but at the same thing going forward, I think part of that contact tracing is basically a workforce, getting people involved in not only the contact tracing, but involved in giving back. I mean, throughout this pandemic, we've asked people to do what's averse to a lot of people, and that's to stay home, to sit on your butts and to watch Netflix, and saying that it's okay to do, but you got to realize that's not who we are as Americans. We like to get up and we like to lean into things. I do believe that coming up, there will be a time in which people can get involved and start to lean into this pandemic through a workforce effort like contact tracing, but also possibly for infrastructure, Steve. I think that's very important going forward. This is something that should have been done ever since I started Congress, to be honest with you. I am bemused as to why there isn't more push to figure out a funding resource for infrastructure, because everybody agrees on infrastructure. And especially now, considering how much it could provide people with opportunity to get back to work would be a huge infrastructure investment. It's just figuring out how to pay for it. Well, look, I think we've unfortunately had to spend quite a bit, which is understandable, on this pandemic. I believe that being an infrastructure project would be a good way as to how we recover a huge infrastructure investment legislation. would be a great way to basically get us to recover out of this pandemic and this self-induced coma that we put our economy in. But I think it's possible. So I think those are things, and then as well as the appropriations packages that are part of our normal year. What type of spending packages we got from the Department of Defense to other domestic spending as well. So those are going to be the hot topics coming up, I believe, when we do get back to session full time. Obviously, like I said, continuing to deal with the pandemic, getting ourselves out of that, but at the same time looking at spending packages for our normal spending issues, and then also hopefully looking at an infrastructure package as well.
Well, this has been a great visit. I just want to thank you for your leadership in DC. I loved what you had to say about, federally funded, state mandated, locally executed. I would definitely agree with the idea that this isn't a light switch, it's a dimmer, that doctors and data play a key role, that it is a balancing act between the economy and public health. One loss of life is tragic. At the same time, we've got to be reasonable. So just really appreciate your openness. The 424-2229 number at the local Salinas office, not to mention Santa Cruz or Monterey. Just really want to thank you, Congressman, and we'll go ahead and we can sign off. I don't want to take too much more of your time. This has been really valuable, and I'll definitely be sharing this through my channels as a council member in Salinas, and really look forward to continuing to work with you.
That's it. That's exactly it, and that's what's going to take. Like I said, I mean, although there's not like one strategy, I think we've been able to put it together in the way that I've talked about, in the way that we're seeing, and a lot of it is up to you guys there at the City Council, and you guys have been doing a great job with your leadership and your activities, and continuing to do these types of things would give people knowledge about where we're at, which is very, very important, because a lot of people want to hear that these days, because they're ready and willing to act and get out there when we get back to some sense of normalcy, whatever that may be. It is going to happen, and we'll figure it out, but we're going to continue to do it like we've been doing it, and that's together.
All right. Well, thank you. I look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you very much, Congressman Panetta. This has been a great visit, and I'll look forward to talking to you again soon, okay?
Thanks, Councilman. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye.
See you, Steve.